I'm Kate Deans from Creative Europe Desk UK, and it's an event in collaboration with both David at Traditional Music Forum and also Robert from Scottish Music Industry Association as well. So say hello, everyone, as well. Stand up and give away. I'm sure most of you know them. So I'm really pleased to be running the event with both of you too. At Creative Europe Desk UK, we obviously focus on promoting Creative Europe funding opportunities, but it's a recognition of the fact that this collaborative project sits within a wider landscape of people working internationally, having international contacts, being members of networks, having partnerships, all these kind of things. So really pleased that you're able to make it here today, and hopefully it'll be a bit of an exchange of people sharing their own experiences and learning something new about the networks and opportunities that are out there. Just a bit of housekeeping. The slides will be sent around afterwards, so don't frantically try and scroll down everything that's up here. If there is a fire, as far as I know, there is no drill plan, so you can see the fire exits signposted over here. So today we've got two sessions, one focusing on networks and partnerships. So we will be hearing from 4 speakers, Ian Smith, Carol Main, Dave Francis and Jill Roger. We'll introduce them a little bit later on. There will be tea and coffee and cake if you sit through until 3:45 to keep us going until session 2, which will be then kind of digging into a little bit more about, okay, beyond those kind of initial networks and so on, what happens when you have certain partners that you would like to work collectively on a particular project? So focusing on a particular idea. So we've got 2 examples of Creative Europe supported projects that we'll be hearing about later on. Andy from Creative Place and also Judith from National Youth Orchestras of Scotland too. Finally, at 5 o'clock, we're hoping that you'll be able to stay behind for a little bit longer to network with everyone else that's attending here and get your chance to grab someone's elbow who you've kind of heard speak earlier on in the session. So thanks again for coming. Before we get started on session 1, I'm really happy to have Alan Morrison, who's my colleague at Creative Scotland, the new, I don't know if we can say new anymore, new head of music.
He's still here.
All right. So we just invite Alan up to say a few words. I think we need to get a lapel mic on him very quickly, plus a little bit, and then we'll.
It was only a few days, I think, after I'd started as head of music at Creative Scotland that the EU referendum vote came in, and that morning we went into the office and it was complete shell shock. But even by the next day, we were starting to get emails and we were starting to get calls from people, particularly in Europe, saying, we noticed Scotland voted a bit differently. So in terms of some sort of artistic solidarity, we would really like to work with Scotland next year, maybe as a focus at our festival or with our organisations in some sort of partnership. And that was the word that kept coming through, was solidarity. And it kind of seems to me that that is what we can contribute across the artistic spectrum, musicians particularly, is that we can create that solidarity that goes up against all this xenophobic language we're hearing at the moment. Now, as this session goes on today, you'll get more practical information than I can give about things like problems that might be with movement of people or getting equipment across borders or visas or anything like that. And I'm sure most of you actually know, in terms of Creative Scotland funding, how a lot of that works. So I won't go into a lot of detail here about the different routes of regular funded organisations, open project funds, the small amount of targeted funds that we have. If there is anything you want to ask about that, do grab me later. But what I wanted to kind of just use this little bit to talk about was how at the moment we're starting to think about some of those international engagements through funding. And if you think you can break things down just roughly into 4 types of music of, say, broadly folk, the contemporary bands, jazz, classical, they've all got their different demands when they're reaching out to find a platform in Europe. this coming year, what we've tried to do is use a little bit of targeted money to just up our presence somewhere in the sectors for all of those. So, for example, there's going to be a big folk presence at the Lorient Festival in France and Rudolstadt in Germany, where Scotland will be the country of focus for those, and about, I think between the two of them, 160 Scottish musicians are going out there. For classical, we're trying to work with Scottish Music Centre to increase our presence at Classical Next, the event in Rotterdam, where for the first time we can have a Scottish stall that other people who can't get over there as delegates can at least have a presence through material that will be distributed through the Scottish stall. Similar thing we're trying to do with getting some delegate presence at Jazz Ahead at Bremen. And recently, in terms of the bands, for the first time, Creative Scotland contributed into the PRS's International Showcase Fund, which was a way of thinking that bands who are officially invited to places like Folk Alliance, South by Southwest, Reaper Band, Talent Music Week, can apply to that fund. And because of the match funding that PRS offer, it just means that we've got a little bit more spend than we would have. That might well end up being mitigated by extra costs and exchange rates and things like that, but it means we shouldn't have any less ability to get people out there by going through PRS. So the question then is, why do we do these things? What do we think? It's partly about raising Scotland's status at these key industry events where people who will book festivals and tours or agents will come to, but it's also therefore about trying to find ways to open doors into Europe for working musicians and people in the industry here. Generally, I'd like to think that it raises Scottish music up a bit so that it's not externally just seen as Scottish music is tartanised folk music, that everything that we produce over every type of genre is excellent, has quality, and so therefore, if it is seen as Scottish, people will take a chance on it because they know that the Scottish brand itself is good. But coming back to this, this idea of where we are politically at the moment, we are seeing a lot of xenophobic language in the press everywhere. And who's going to stand up against that? Politicians, a few of them. The media, very few of them. It's going to be the artists, the musicians. And what I've begun to think of is that we all have, and I think the funding bodies too, what's entered into this at this point in history is a moral element. It's that do we have some sort of responsibility to try and change perceptions through the work that you can create and we can perhaps fund. And in these cases, it's not really your core audiences that you might be trying to play to. It's going to be the people who voted Leave, the Brexiteers, people leaning towards the right. Because what you can show through international collaborations is that foreign cultures enrich and strengthen our own traditional cultures, and that ultimately what I would love to see that Creative Scotland could instigate in certain ways and that we could see happening over the next few years is that collaborations across Europe come out whereby what is seen as foreign is not feared anymore, and that we make the world a better place through the work that you guys can do. So have a good afternoon. Thank you.